February 1874. The San Juan Mountains were buried in snow. No marked trails, no safe crossings, just a group of 6 men, strangers really, that were drawn together by gold. They left Los Pinos Indian Agency on foot, hoping to cross the range and strike it rich. Only one of them came out, and he looked too well fed for a man who had claimed to barely survive. And when people started asking questions, his answers changed again and again. What followed was a discovery so gruesome, it shocked even hardened frontiersmen. This is the story of Alferd Packer, the self proclaimed guide that walked out of the mountains, a cannibal. Hey guys, what is up? I have missed doing the podcast for the last couple weeks or a month, I guess. I went to Lassen, climbed Mount Lassen, honestly got a little sick at the top. But otherwise, it went great and we had the best time. And today is actually me and Jeff's 6-year wedding anniversary. So we have been married for 6 years, together for 10. And I'm actually doing an episode today that is kind of about the winter, even though it's summer right now. But what was kind of cool is I found out about this story when Jeff and I were celebrating our 4th anniversary, I think. And he was riding through Colorado and Wyoming, and I took a flight down and met him at the end of his riding trip, and we did some camping, some off-roading and a side-by-side, checked out a lot of old mines, and while we were camping, I actually was researching just the area and, like, cool stories. We had service where we were one night, and I found this story about this guy. His name was Alferd Packer, and Alferd Packer is still today known as the Colorado Cannibal. So I thought that would be an interesting story, and then also like a weird way to, kind of link in my anniversary to this episode. I don't know. I was trying to make it work, but anyways, let's get into this story. Alferd Packer, whose full name was Alfred Greiner Packer, was born in Pennsylvania in 1842 and raised in Indiana. He had a difficult upbringing and a bitter relationship with his parents, and by his late teens had left home to work as a shoemaker. Isn't it also called a cobbler, I think? He served briefly in the Union Army during the Civil War, but was discharged not once, but twice due to epilepsy. So afterward, he wandered the western frontier, picking up odd jobs as a hunter, teamster, ranch hand, and miner. He never stuck with anything long and built a reputation for dishonesty, theft, and a good old knack for telling people what they wanted to hear. A shiesty man. He also claimed to be a wilderness guide, though those who knew him said he frequently actually got lost, exaggerated his experience, and was better at lying than leading. It was this self proclaimed expertise that convinced a group of strangers to trust him in the winter of 1874. And it was that same bravado that led 6 men into the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, only for one of them to return. Packer ended up joining a expedition that was led by this guy named Bob McGrew. So Bob was a prospector from Utah, and he had gathered a group of 20 or more men who were mostly all strangers to each other, and they wanted to journey from Salt Lake City to chase rumors of gold fields in the mountains of Breckenridge, Colorado. And so when they encountered Packer, who had no rifle, only a Colt revolver and the clothes on his back. Near Provo, Utah, Packer saw an opportunity. He claimed he was a seasoned guide familiar with the San Juan country and offered his services for $25. This guy talked a good game, enough to where this pack of prospectors believed him. And it was enough to put their lives in his hands. So, what a dick. Like, he had never even been to Colorado before, so it's funny. Like, he'd said that he was seasoned traveler through the San Juans, which are super brutal. So, from the start, Packer rubbed people the wrong way. He was known pretty much immediately as being lazy, argumentative, and greedy with rations. He clashed especially with one man named Frank Miller, a former butcher, and others noticed how obsessed he seemed with how much money the group was carrying, like how much money each person had. By January of 1874, deep in Colorado territory, the expedition reached the winter camp of Chief Ouray of the Ute tribe. And he was pretty well known as being nicknamed White Man's Friend. He welcomed the starving men and offered food, shelter, and a very dire warning. And he said, "Do not enter the mountains. Not even Ute hunters would go that time of year. It's suicide." But Gold Fever does not care about warnings. 11 of the men decided to press on. Chief Ouray advised them if they were going to go, then they should follow the river valleys. And 5 of the men did just that. Took a safer route along the Gunnison River, and the other 6, which included Al Packer, chose what he claimed was a shortcut over the mountains, which he's just like Delulu. On February 9th, 1874, that group set out from Los Pinos Indian Agency. And the group consisted of Israel Swan, who was 65. He was the oldest in the group and was said to be carrying thousands in cash. Frank Miller, which is kind of crazy because him and Frank didn't really get along, as I said earlier. They called him the Butcher. James Humphrey, Shannon Bell, who was red-haired and hot-tempered. George California Noon, who was like 16, just a teenager. And then Alferd Packer. They had no snowshoes, very little ammunition, no warm clothes, and barely 2 weeks' worth of food. They were heading into one of the harshest winters Colorado had ever seen. And then, after 2 long months, on April 16th, 1874, a man stumbled back into Los Pinos Agency alone. That man was Alferd Packer. He claimed the others had died one by one, that he'd survived on roots, rosebuds, and boiled leather. But there was signs that something was off. He didn't look starved. In fact, people said he looked suspiciously well fed for someone who just walked through hell for 2 straight months. He was carrying items that didn't belong to him, which included blankets, knives, a rifle, and when he was questioned about this, his story shifted and shifted again. Eventually, he admitted that Shannon Bell had gone mad, that Bell had killed the other 4, and that Packer shot Bell in self-defense, then ate the dead men to survive. Authorities still weren't satisfied with this, and he was arrested. But before the case could go to trial, Packer escaped. He disappeared into the frontier for 9 years. Fucking crazy. You could get away with that back then. Later that summer, a search party found the site of the final camp, and as you can imagine, it was grim. All 5 of the men were found buried around a crude shelter. 4 had died from blunt force trauma, 1 had been shot. Strips of flesh were missing from their bodies, some were flayed down to the bone. Inside the shelter were pieces of dried meat and human remains. In 1883, Packer was finally caught near Cheyenne, Wyoming, so we hadn't even gone that far. He was brought back to Colorado and stood trial in Lake City. The courtroom was packed. Reporters swarmed the town, so this was like a huge media circus for this case. The judge famously told him there were 7 Democrats in Hinsdale County, and you ate 5 of them. He was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to hang, but that conviction was overturned. At a retrial, he was found guilty of 5 counts of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 40 years. He served 17 years before he ended up being released on parole. So, Alferd Packer lived the rest of his life in quiet obscurity. He worked as a security guard at the Denver Post. He died in 1907 and was buried in Littleton, Colorado, under a military headstone. The place where the bodies were found is now named Cannibal Plateau, and it's basically just this bleak, treeless expanse in the San Juan Mountains near Lake City, and you can hike it. I think it's like an 8 to 10 mile hike or something, but you can hike out there. And today, Lake City actually still marks the tale with a wink and a grim grin. There's even a Packer Days celebration, but behind the reenactments and folklore lies something much darker. Alfred Packer, to the day he died, never wavered in his claim that he killed only in self defense. But 5 men went into the mountains with him, and every one of them came out in pieces. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the wilderness isn't the cold, or the hunger, or the storm. It's the man who says he knows his way. Thanks, guys. I hoped you enjoyed this story. And if you did, please follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook, comment on any of the platforms that you listen on. It helps me immensely. Email me at wildcuriositypodcast@gmail.com, Instagram handle wildcuriositypodcast, and just search that on Facebook. And yeah, let's get in touch and be careful out there. But also go to Colorado because it's really sick and has a ton of cool mountains and shit. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the story of the Colorado cannibal. Stay curious, explore the wild, and maybe think twice about trusting a man who says he knows a shortcut. Bye.